You're listening to Limitless Leaders Podcast. Accelerate your mindset, collaboration and performance by developing limitless self-leadership, leaders, teams and organizations. Now, over to your host, Renée Giarrusso.
Hi, and welcome to the Limitless Leaders Podcast. Wherever you're viewing from or listening in around the world, as always, we appreciate your feedback, and I'm super excited to introduce you to today's guest. So today I have the amazing Michael Bartura, and Michael is the founder and chief happiness officer at his business that's called Happy Habits Coaching. So he founded Happy Habits Coaching to provide mindfulness-based coaching and training to executives and teams. And his philosophy and the practice of around the core of his work is that the idea of positive neuroplasticity, how with the right kind of practice, we can rewire the brain to become less inclined to fear and avoid, and be more open, I guess, to embrace and engage. Michael's facilitated individual and mastermind programs for people that are invariably successful. They tick all the boxes in terms of what our culture and society tells them should lead them to fulfillment and happiness. And yet they still get up in the morning wondering, is this all, that there is to life, or why they're not managing to feel a sustainable sense of happiness. Some people he works with are looking for grounding in practice, others for purpose and for meaning. And today, I'm just so happy to have you here, Michael. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be on the show, on the podcast.
Yeah, like we interview guests from all around the world in all different disciplines. And I know we had a conversation prior to this and really fascinated with the work that you do. And it really aligns with how our whole limitless leadership, model about unlearning, relearning and evolving. And I think that's, a lot of the work that you do.
Yeah.
So we've got lots of people out there listening or watching, because we have this in visual and audio, that, are leaders, business owners in, executive roles, or could be entrepreneurs doing something in a different field. I guess I'd love to ask you, just briefly, how have you got to where you are today and doing what you currently do?
Of course. I think there were two elements that contribute to that. One was a bit more conscious than the other. And so when I was young, I grew up in a different culture, and for the length of time that I was in that culture, I kind of knew myself to be the story that I sort of, grew up into. You're part of this culture and you're part of this nationality, and there was a sense of a self or an identity that was very much cohesive with what was going on there. And yet, because of local troubles and situations where I was growing up, there was also a sense of unease. And essentially grew up in the Middle East. It's a troubled area. So I had this experience of kind of thinking that I know who I am, and at the same time feeling very unsettled. And then I started traveling around my 20s, and it suddenly became apparent to me that what I thought I knew about myself and what I thought about how I show up in the world was actually a very specific narrative.
Yeah.
Because that's what I knew as myself, right? And it wasn't until I got a reference point outside that narrative that it allows me to think, well, okay, but if my narrative only fits within particular context of culture and nation, who am I actually when I'm not in there, right? Who am I in Australia? Who am I in Asia? Or who am I, in other contexts, right? And at that age, I don't think I had the maturity to sort of understand that. But that drive was there to sort of try and understand, who am I essentially? And that led me to, sort of the usual kind of walkabout of attending retreats and reading books and working with therapists and trying to figure out, who am I, so to speak. So that was That was the less conscious sort of drive. I knew that something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what it is, and I was looking for answers. And then as I got on with my life, I became, I first worked as a therapist for about 12 years as a somatic therapist.
Yes.
And then I moved on to management jobs, and I did senior management jobs in not-for-profit. It became apparent to me that most of the angst that we feel has to do with the way that we relate to our experience. In other words, we have a certain conversations in our head, and that conversation dictates our experience with what's going on. And so I dug deeper and deeper into trying to understand, well, what makes that conversations more resourceful? How can I change the way I think about things in a way that makes me feel, happier and more engaged and more interested and less impacted by the ups and downs in life, because life is unpredictable and it goes up and then it goes down, right? So that was the more conscious sort of drive. And if you put those two together, I'm really, I'm humbled by having that experience, but I have about, sort of like few decades of sort of trying to understand what makes us think in the way we are and how can we think in a way that makes us happier. And that's the background for it.
I love that. I love that. So that it's been really a lot of an inwards discovery around, we grow up with these societal norms and this narrative that that we think is set in stone, and it's not. And I sort of look at you, and it's in some of the work we do, it's thinking about the way you think and being open to the fact that that can change to serve you based on where you're at, because we're always changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I may throw just a little sort of touch point here, which is really interesting, there's a psychologist called Lisa Miller who works out, I think, out of one of the Ivy League universities in the US, Columbia, I think. And she founded a center called Center for Mind, Body, and Spirit in that university, and brought the whole idea of a spiritual inquiry as part of psychological wellness. One of the fascinating things she discovered is that we actually have circuits in our brain that are particularly looking to kind of wake up and start working around the age of being a teen.
Yeah.
And at that point, if the society doesn't facilitate what used to be in the past, rites of passages and training for teenagers to sort of understand how to show up as a young adult in the world, those circuits don't get, kind of like the engagement that they're looking for. They're actually looking for this self-awareness, to become self-aware, to understand it. And so it's really important for us to look for ways to engage with those circuits and bring out a sense of self that is more aware, more present, and allows us to curate our relationship with the present moment rather than be a complete, sort of victim of it, which most of us, unfortunately, kind of do.
It does happen. I've felt that. I'm on a bit of a spiritual awakening myself. I've always been very spiritual, very aware, very in touch. And I think, I'm sure you'd agree, especially with the last few years, we've all gone on into this survival mode. And not really looking inwards. There's a lot of outward connection, not a lot of inwards connection, or what I call whole connection. So how do people, if people were listening to this and said, I feel, I'm on this treadmill of life and I really want to go a bit more inwards and raise my self-awareness, what's a strategy or a tool someone listening to this could implement?
That's a beautiful question. So if we start to contemplate our daily experience, what we realize is that we kind of drive this vehicle in an unconscious way. In other words, we continuously are in our experience. We can only be in our experience in the present moment. But most of the time, we're not present in that experience. Instead of it, we're running scripts in our heads. Most of those scripts are kind of on automatic pilot. They're sort of a collage of past experiences and scripts that we sort of adopted as we grew up. And most of the time we spend our sort of waking time in thinking about stuff that happened in the past and projecting stuff into the future and kind of trying to control what's going on for us right now through projecting that script and saying, okay, well, what can I manipulate, or how can I change, or how can I, sort of do this better? But it's all out of that assumed continuity of self that is, feels like who we are, but it's really made just out of a bunch of thoughts.
Oh, yeah,
And
totally.
so if you start to moment by moment see if you can trigger yourself to become a little bit more aware as you are doing something. In other words, you not just engage. I'm not just engaging in a conversation with Renée, but there's a part of me that's observing myself engaging in a conversation with Renée. I start to create a little bit of space between that ongoing droning kind of thoughts narrative that just pass through the head all the time. Depends on which research you look at. Some people suggest 20,000, some people suggest up to 80,000, but there's a lot of thoughts going on in everyone's head every day, and most of it we're not even aware of it. We live the experience of thinking it, but we're not aware of the experience of thinking it.
Yeah.
And so looking for a way to become a little bit more conscious of being in a thought process as I'm interacting with my reality is kind of like the first step, this developing this capacity to observe. And this can be done just by either having like little triggers. For example, you could put a little, sort of a little symbol or a sign on your computer that says, remember to breathe, or remember to, like be present or whatnot. Or indeed, and this is the recommended pathways, I would say, take some sort of an ongoing practice, 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day of reflection. And that brings a muscle in it. It sort of builds up that capacity.
You're creating a habit. I mean, hence your business name. And I'm a big believer in habits, that every habit has a trigger. So what you're saying is actually creating thought habits and trigger points to see yourself, observe yourself. That's the key word that stood out there, which resonated with me, because you're right. We do all these things and think something's driving it, but we don't stop and look at, I call it the DJ in our head.
Yeah, I love that expression.
Yeah,
Can I use that? That's beautiful.
I think it's the DJ, and unfortunately, the voice in our head is our voice, so we tend to listen to it.
Yeah,
but it's really not us.
Yeah,
it's just a collection of your past,
correct.
Experience.
These are voices that we assimilated, right, from early experiences in which voices of people who were important in our life, our caregivers, our parents, or whoever was a prominent sort of figure in our life in early childhood, they had certain conversations that they were sort of professing in their experience with their reality, and we kind of listened to that and we adopted those to repeat them, because that's how we learned language. And we also actually adopted both the emotional and the construct that went with those, in terms of like my belief system in the world. So we certainly are, we grew up in a certain garden, and we showed for the kind of nourishment that we got from that ground in the voices that shows up through our head.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And look, everything you're saying is resonating with me. I'm really, as I know my listeners know this, I do a lot of this in the work that we do. And I think it's just so important, and it's come to the surface a lot more the last few years. There's an awakening happening without getting too deep. It's there.
Yeah.
I remember, Michael, 17 years ago when I started my business, if I did a values elicitation or said to leaders, what are your values? They just looked at me like values was a bit esoteric. Now I can go in and do breath work. We do mindful moments in our workshops to get people to go inwards. And we have a lot of left brain clients, lawyers and engineers, and they love it. So I think we're at this exciting time where we're realizing things don't have to be the way they are, and they don't have to stay the way they are. I always say too, the past is a graveyard, and I'm a big believer in learning from the past. That's all like if mindset work. But the future isn't guaranteed. All we have is now. And I think when I always say that to myself, it really makes me go, everything that happens now will determine what's going to happen next. So observing, you mentioned just taking 10 minutes. It could be journaling, meditating. It could be sitting in the garden. It could just be, I know for me, having a bath.
Yeah.
where I'm only in there 15 minutes, but I just zone out. So it's
Yeah.
finding that sacred space for you and what works for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And in a sense, if you think about it, it's not so much that you're zoning out, you're actually zoning in, right? Like you become
That's what I mean. Yeah.
and sensual experiences that appeal to our senses are actually really good at that. Because we can only have a sensual or an emotional experience which is right now. We tend to do stuff with it in our head, but the actual moment to experience as it unfolds, both on a somatic and an emotional level, happens in the present moment. And so those are gateways for us, right? What am I feeling right now? What am I sensing right now? Oh, I love the experience of the water on my body, or like I'm feeling upset at the moment. Okay, let me be with that upset, because the tendencies of those experiences to rise up and then go, and rise up and then go. And it allows us to sort of tune into that present moment just by being in the experience of what happens on our emotions or in our bodies.
And that's important, isn't it? Like, we all have to keep soldiering on, and we do need to get on with things, but I always say to people, if you're having a down day or you're not feeling right, let that be the case. Just don't make it every day, especially if you're leading a team.
Yeah.
We've got to almost have self-empathy. Empathy comes from the German word, which means feeling in, right?
Yeah, indeed.
So some empathy, some self-empathy, I think it's a bit deeper almost than self-compassion.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I highlight an aspect here that is really quite important to understand, and that is that our brain evolved, the human brain has evolved in a very particular condition. And essentially that condition meant that we were an animal living on the savannah, trying to survive in small groups. And at that point, you could see us less as the dominating force that we are, as a super ape that, is sort of like top of the kind of the hierarchy of nature, and more as a sort of middle layer, food for predators. In other words, we were more like zebras than we were like lions. And so the human brain at that point was very much geared towards, where is the danger? And its priority is not whether we're happy or not whether we're fulfilled or not whether we kind of like actuate ourselves, or sort of really bring my value and my purpose to the world, which are brilliant. But essentially your brain is more on the lookout of what's dangerous and how can I survive it. And so when you look at the content of our thinking, invariably that content tend to kind of lean into the negative, the fearful, the expectant of the things that are going to go wrong, rather than the positive, because there's no value, there's no lasting value in being happy, but there is a lot of lasting value in being careful to survive, right? And so about 80% of our thoughts on average tend to be negative.
Yes.
And unless we learn to cultivate and strengthen the inner muscles of self-compassion, self-awareness, being kind to ourselves, being kind to other people, we're going to spend a lot of our time feeling quite miserable, because the brain is better surviving being miserable, because there might be tigers out there. And that's what it's trying to do.
That's so pertinent. And that sort of makes me think about, feedback. We do a lot with feedback. I think feedback, no such thing as failure, only feedback. But it's funny, isn't it? Like, as human beings, how often do we get great feedback, and there might be one little thing that's not 100%, but that's what we focus on.
Yeah.
So
because that's what the brain's supposed to do.
Yeah, we're wired for that fight or flight.
Yeah. If you walk on the savannah in the middle of the day and there are 100 fruit trees around you, the brain is not looking for the fruit tree. The brain is looking for the one line. And it's continuously scoping for, where is the danger? Where is the danger? Oh, yeah, there's a fruit tree. Good. I might engage with it. I might eat some fruit, but I'm not so worried about it. I'm worried about where is the lion going to come from. And that's what I'm focused on.
So would you say, for people that do that, and a lot do, and I always say for people going through change, and we're all going through constant change, focus on what you have got, not what's missing. Is that the same sort of strategy that you'd say to use for that, as far as when you
you could say that. I think that you'll be better off sort of like adopting almost like a matrix of strategies that allow you to continuously lean away from that negative tendency and into the positive tendency. So, for example, a really good inquiry, self-inquiry, is that when we engage with something and we worried, or we concerned, or we fearful, or we feel that something is not in our control, again, looking from that sort of observer capacity, ask ourselves questions like, okay, well, what is really alive right now? Is it just my projection of thinking about it? Or is there danger
Is there
in
evidence?
real time, right?
Yeah.
Is that real? Because most of the time it's not. I think it was Mark Twain who said, in my life, I'm not quoting verbatim, but in my life I've gone through many horrors. I've lived through many horrors, most of which have never happened. In other words, it's our thinking that creates that kind of like, oh, this is going to go wrong, right? So developing the awareness to understand what's real and what's not, how much of it is just in our thoughts and how much of it is real. Another good question is it going to make a difference? Is it matter to me in 30 years' time? What I'm going through now, and it seems like, oh, this is terrible.
That one.
Is it really that terrible? It just happens to be that right now it feels terrible, and you tend to sort of focus on that. Another really important aspect, and that sort of practice that Rick Hanson suggests and curates so beautifully, is this idea of positive neuroplasticity. In other words, how do we train the mind to notice more the good positive experiences which actually fill our day most of the day? Most of us very lucky, especially in Australia. But I dare say that the people who are listening to this are the people who generally are fairly lucky in their life. If they have the time to do that, they're not cracking stones for, to put a meal on the table for 14 hours a day. And they're not, they're not dealing with really, really difficult life situation, in the sense that they have some time to take off and self-reflect through podcasts, that makes you think and reflect. So if that's the case, then you're likely to have a lot of great moments in your life, but they might not be very high in terms of their intensity. But your cup of coffee in the morning with a Danish, or just going outside your house and you look around and you go, oh my God, there's beautiful nature around me. Can I just stop for a sec and appreciate it? And you want to dial up your ability to internalize and appreciate all those moments, which we have probably hundreds of every day, and we're not actually taking them in. So
that goes into gratitude. We do
yes,
a lot of work
absolutely.
on
Gratitude is
the gift of gratitude and optimism underlies resilience, right? So
yes, indeed.
And I'm sure you've got lots of statistics too, like gratitude, the well-being aspects of it are phenomenal. People in gratitude. And I always say, who and what are you grateful for? We actually kick off all our meetings like that, and workshops, because it gets people in a forward thinking. So some great things there. So it's, being in gratitude, focusing on what you do have, taking the time to be aware, being an observer of yourself. And I think another one, Michael, I know you do a lot of work around as well, is reframing. Our thoughts are so powerful. So I think it's really paying attention to, how are you speaking to yourself? Because usually we're our harshest critics. So having those reframes. I know in the middle of COVID, when people were going, I'm so lonely, years ago I would have said, oh no, but I said, who can you connect with? So just really having those curiosity open questions instead of statements can help provocate, observe, and then bring in that new way of thinking, which is amazing.
And understanding what is in your control, right? Like we spend a lot of time trying to control the circumstances, which are completely out of our control, right? I mean, maybe the next minute is, but if you thought you had control in the early 2020, I think the planet proved very clearly that we have no control. No one planned for this pandemic, and within 3 months it shut down the world, right? So the question is then, okay, well, what can we control? And we can control what we focus on. We can control what we tell ourselves about what's going on. We can control the actions that we take in response. So if we bring ourselves back from continuously just being obsessed with, it's not so, it doesn't really suit my, my reality doesn't suit my expectation, and now I'm going to spend a lot of time trying to change reality so it suits my expectation, and say, okay, well, what is in my control right now and what is not? And all the time we have the right and the capacity to change how we think about something. That's
the one choice we all have.
A superpower that we all have. We can change the way that we perceive something. And that's where we got the freedom to kind of grow.
And it's amazing because you're right. I always say the one thing we have, doesn't matter what age, gender, nationality, we have our thoughts. I've always said our thoughts create our feelings and emotions, and therefore our outcomes. So always go back to your thoughts, because I think so many people label feelings as thoughts. I feel right. I did a post on this one. So don't label your feelings as thoughts. Feelings are the result of what you're thinking. So I'm feeling sad, you're just going to feel sadder. But what about saying, what thoughts were I thinking before I had this emotion? And then flipping the script so that you get a different outcome. It's exciting when you look at it like that. I just love and touch. I wanted to ask you, Michael, like, we do a bit of what we call M-braining, multiple braining. So I do a lot of coaching around head, heart, and intuition. So bringing in those three and balancing them. Do you think, in this fast-paced world, and I know in Australia and a lot of countries, there's inflation, there's a lot going on. Do you think that sometimes makes us lead or speak or just think from the head and not bring in the heart, the compassion, or the intuition, the knowing? And we just end up, I say, just being head thinkers. That happens?
I think unfortunately we live in a society where we're trained to operate at that level. Right? The idea of being emotional as sort of like the whole person in the workplace is not encouraged, right? In fact, if you're too emotional, that seems to be kind of like, derided. Right. The idea of intuition, using intuition for decision making is pretty tricky, right? Like because you cannot justify it, it's not rational or whatever. And so sorry, there's someone at the door.
Oh, that always happens.
Can we just can you just sorry about that. Sorry about that. How do we allow ourselves to trust that our experience in the present moment has got the head, the heart, the intuition, and even if it's not foolproof, and even if it's not like something that I know I'm totally in control of, I totally know how to do that, there is a natural intelligence in me, and there's a natural intelligence in groups. And I can allow myself to explore that and be curious about it and be comfortable. Like you said, failure is feedback. If like we're so worried about not doing the right thing, but if the right thing is always the right thing in terms of either it's something I can learn to develop a power, or I can learn to develop a knowledge, or I can get inspired by. All of that stuff is available if we just kind of relax around this idea of, I just got to calculate the right answer, and there's only one right answer.
You're right. And it's just sitting with it. And, I always, and I'm very intuitive. And I found the last few years I've gone really survival mode. So I'm very much, when I'm making decisions, and I suggest this to all, especially the one-on-one work I do, when you've got a decision to make, what's the data, the rationale, the logic, the consequence? That's all the head stuff. Then what am I feeling? Who is this going to affect? How does it make me feel? What am I knowing? What do I believe to be true? And you can work through these three areas. And I love the word you use, which is trust. I think trust comes before awareness. I used to think it was the other way around. If you become aware, you can be more trusting of others and self. But now I think if you have that trust, then your awareness is amplified. Goes the other way.
And it is a beautiful class of experiences or states where you need to do more of it in order to develop that capacity. So in order to be more trusting, you need to be able to trust. You need to you trust, and so you allow yourself to experience the outcomes of trust and trust that outcome, right? So and it's similar with kindness. In order to develop the capacity to be kinder, you need to be kind, and so on. So like,
it's the irony in our expertise, I call that.
yeah, I love that. I love that. Essentially, here is the kind of the crux of it, right? And that is knowing that at any given moment, what is a problem is also potentially the gift that will give something else.
Yeah.
And you know what? Even if it's not true, it's a much better mindset to adopt.
Well, that's the gift mindset, Michael. That's what that's what all my work's about. The gift mindset is all about unwrapping the gift, being open to unwrap the gift in challenging situations and people, and positive situations and people.
Yes.
Filling down the lesson, the gift, and then we have the 12 gifts that they fall into.
That's right. Yes. No, I remember we chatted about that before. Yes.
Deepen and develop. And look, it's, sometimes I'm not going to lie to you, when COVID hit, when my sister got ill, I was like, I was writing my book at the time. I was like, what is the gift in this? And I think sometimes gifts are hidden. Sometimes they're in the past. Sometimes you have to actually unwrap them and move through them before you can actually appreciate what they are.
Yeah.
So
there is an inherent gift in realizing we're not in control.
Yeah.
Because we spend so much time trying to control stuff. Right. And so exploring that, I'll give you another example. There is a real gift in understanding that we're interconnected.
Yeah.
Like whether you agree with the policies or not, the essence of what happened to us in 2020, 2021 is that we needed to literally curtail, possibly often damage our own life in order to protect someone that we don't even know.
Yeah.
How grand is that in the bigger scheme of things, where everything is so focused on me and mine and, like benefit myself, where suddenly all of us has to kind of like surrender to this idea that the interconnectedness of our experience is so complicated and so aligned with each other, that we now have to think about how do I do it? How do I change my own life? So other people can live. I think that was a very big sort of moment in that sense.
That's massive. Like, if that hasn't taught us that we are all connected, I don't know what will.
Well, hopefully it did, and we learning from it. Long lessons. In other words, it's not just a blip of the pandemic, but how did it affect sort of work environment? How did it affect appreciating relatives, right? Like there's a lot of stuff. Or even look how many Zoom calls have you been on in the last 3 or 4 years, where suddenly, instead of regularly meeting with people who are familiar with you, you suddenly see this plethora of faces from all over the world on the same calls. And like, just on that level itself, the idea that we're suddenly sharing ideas and spaces and conversations with people who look very different to us, that's a boon that we haven't had it before. Often here in Australia, maybe a bit more used to it, but generally right around the world, beautiful kind of salad of faces in most.
It's amazing. And people I've met that I would never have met, So look, speaking on, we might have to have a part 2, but speaking about lessons and things, what would be 1 or 2 of the lessons or the gifts that things you've been through, and what did you learn out of it? Because I think a lot of the time we look at what we've been through, if it's challenging, and we go tick. And to me, that's an event. We've got to unwrap it to actually appreciate the experience, and then go, how can I use, the pandemic taught me a million things, but I've always been very resilient. The resilience I had to have to get through that, I know now I could get through anything. And I learned all these other different strategies that now I teach other people. So it's the gift that keeps giving. What would be 1 or 2 of the life's lessons?
Okay. One thing, I'll say two things indeed. So the first one is this idea that we don't see our relationship with our experience as a preordained, what I would call an orientation towards an organizing principle. So we perceive the world through our belief system. It's a little bit like what would be a good example? Robert Keegan, the lecturer Robert Keegan, he talks about this idea that you drive a car and you look at the road, and to you think to your experience, you think you're interacting with what's coming up on the road. But what you're not seeing is that you continuously all the time look through the windscreen. You don't see the windscreen, but that is what you're looking through. And our personality, our belief systems, our ideas about how the world is not something that we're conscious of, but it translates what we see to something that we can comprehend, because the brain is actually quite a miser in terms of analyzing and putting together the understanding of what's going on, and it does it by creating shortcuts and taking the stuff that fits our belief system. It's easier, it's quicker for the brain to digest our biases, right? And so this orientation toward an organizing principle is the way that we look for how to understand the world. And that's very useful for us. But know that you are in control of that orientation, and ask yourself, what can you do that could change that? And I'll give you a very quick story, just as an example. Many years ago, I was working in Bangkok, and I noticed that there were, in some of those big flyovers, like 4 lanes on each side and then a big flyover in the middle. Sometimes there was a very poor family living in one of those. And it suddenly hit me that for a child that grows up in that reality, all they see, because they stay small, right? All they see is just cars going at that, imagine that all you saw in your life is just cars going at that level across your face all the time, and the noise and the pollution and this, like just pretty dreadful kind of experience to grow up in. And I thought, my God, I can never, ever complain about my circumstances. Like there's people in the world who grow up in the most atrocious circumstances, and the reason why I thought it is because I saw a group of children doing that and smiling and laughing, and I thought, wow, like humanity is so resilient, it just adapt. But I'm very lucky because I don't have to adapt to that extreme. So gratitude, in a sense, to all the good stuff that we have is a really good orientation to start with. Like you said before, ask yourself daily, it's gone great, rather than what has gone wrong, right? So that is one thing. And the second thing is we tend to, or at least, that's what I've observed, is that we tend to interact with other people in the domain of what's, what utility do I, can I gain from having that interaction, right? And other than our most immediate kind of experience with children, which tends to be unconditional. In other words, even when the child is annoying, you still love them. Almost all our experience, even with our second half, quite often is, does that help me the way I want life to be or not, right? And pulling back from that again and just seeing the marvelous experience of being able to interact with another conscious human being and look for that connection where, wow, like life is pretty cool. And I look at it this way. How do you look at it? And what can we, sort of teach each other in that sort of exchange? That is a really beautiful way to start to experience interactions with other people that are not necessarily comfortable, but suddenly open up the world for us to grow together, to learn from each other, to spend our right.
That's I love that. Beautiful. And I love what you said. It's almost that sort of the map is not the territory. We all see differently, but we have that choice. And that's something, if you're listening today, I always say, just pay attention to your thoughts. And if you hear that in a dialogue, that DJ in your head, judging someone or, speaking harshly to yourself, just take a second to flip that, because most thoughts are actually beliefs, right?
And that's why I love this analogy so much, because you can change the record. You are the DJ. You're just putting records because you're used to them, right?
Yeah, that's
You can
right.
decide to change your station from something else, from country to classic, or from classic to pop, whatever. The ultimate question is this way of thinking serving me the best? Is there another way of thinking about it? Because what happened. But the way I think about it, I have the capacity to curate. Do I play the right record for the occasion, or is there another kind of music that will actually bring more benefit, more happiness, more expansion, more surrender, more creativity, more gratitude to this situation?
That's right. And get rid of the white noise, just to throw that.
Yes.
So yeah, we do have that power of thought, and I think that's exciting, because there's really no excuses not to do it. I mean, we've all got a lot on, but it could be, I know for me in the car is I'm usually listening to podcasts, or on the phone. If I'm not, that time that I sort of recalibrate is set. So it's important to do that. We do a lot of work with leaders at all levels and teams, as you know, mid-tier corporate. And I say that, everyone is a leader, because you're a leader of self before you can be a leader of others, before you can be a leader of decisions.
Yeah.
The whole limitless, we're always learning. I'd like to ask you, Michael, who's a leader that you admire and why?
Ooh.
Who's someone that stands out for you?
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of someone that's relevant, because it's easy, it's easy to go to the default kind of past leader.
Yeah.
They're amazing, but I'm trying to think of a leader that is more current, and it's not easy. I think one of the tragedies of our time is that it seems that often in our governance systems, and even in other systems, whether it's the corporate or community, the people who are able to climb to the top of the ladder, so to speak, might be very good at climbing, but not actually very good leaders. And when you look for leaders who are different, you go, okay, what's different about them? So, Jacinta Ardern, for example, in New Zealand,
I like her.
people can say, okay, well, I agree with the politics or not agree with the politics, but there's certain things that she has done that seems to be really kind of like the new way to lead. And to me, it always goes back to interconnectedness, to understanding that when something happens, it's not about, that particular setup, but it's that setup and everyone else that it's benefiting or been impacted by it. The way that she handled, for example, that atrocity with the mosques and the shooter, the Australian shooter.
The earthquakes and
I'll give you another example, which I saw was amazing. Merkel in Germany. I again, I'm not necessarily saying that everyone's politics is great, but I'm saying that point where they had the refugee crisis in Europe.
Yeah.
And someone who's leading a nation with the history that Germany has, which for me are relevant, in terms of my own personal sort of voyage through my family history. But beyond that, she said, we're going to take 1 million refugees into this country. We're going to make that very brave decision for a fabric of a country to take that many people in. I think that's the kind of leadership, because it goes beyond what's me and what's mine, and it sees humanity and it sees the interconnectedness. So I would dare say that leaders who are able to manifest that sort of experience of interconnectedness are leaders that are really kind of stand out for me. And I dare say it's interesting for me in my position as an older man, and sort of like the right looks, so to speak, to be at the top of the pyramid. I think that is a quality of the feminine wisdom, this ability to hold the interconnectedness of everything, and then ask what's right for all of that, rather than just that particular interest that I'm trying to figure out.
That's amazing. And I agree. I'm a big fan of Jacinta Ardern too, and the way, even just the fact that when she resigned, she was just upfront saying, I've done my bit, I want to have time with my daughter, that's the thing. But I think, in the mirror in psychology, they talk about people you admire are usually people that have traits and qualities that you have. And it's an interesting thing, if you're thinking out there, who is it that I admire? And it could be anyone. One of my school teachers growing up is one of mine. Richard Branson's another one. I'm a creative, real right brain thinker. So vision. So I just resonate with what he does and how he thinks, the risks he takes. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. And on the flip side, they say people that we don't, go, I don't click with them, I don't connect with them. Sometimes we'll have traits and qualities that we don't like about ourselves, or we're aware that we never want to have. So I always call those people, Michael, Chris Kringles. In the gift mindset, we call a challenging situation a pass the parcel gift. You know what you're going to get and when.
Yeah,
We call
that.
challenging people Chris Kringle gifts. You ask for perfume and you get socks.
Yeah.
But the Chris Kringles, I know I had a leader many years ago, only one that wasn't great. And I remember sitting down and writing down everything this person was and did. And I went, I'm going to do the opposite when I get a leadership role. So a massive gift. So I gift, as you've mentioned, through the good, through the bad. And I say through successes, because not many successes to get there are easy. So it's those obstacles. And I always say, welcome the unwelcome. I think that's really
beautiful.
So we have, before we go into our little quiz at the end, I'd love to ask you, what's a favorite quote of yours? And I love you bring metaphors and stories in. Like, I love that. What's one of your favorite quotes? Because there's a lot out there.
There are. And now you're sort of putting me on the spot, because most of my favorite quotes are sort of quite complicated, and so I can't remember them verbatim. But I'll see if I can remember this one. And it's Viktor Frankl, right? And he says, in between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our ability to choose, and in that choice lies or inherent our growth and our freedom. So this idea, again, I mean, Viktor Frankl was a psychologist who went through the Holocaust, been in concentration camp, and he realized this capacity of the human mind to stop before you actually make a decision about this is how things are.
Yeah.
And in that space, start to look for what is the choice that will make me a bigger human being, a more expanded human being, a more enlightened human being, a more connected human being, a more kind human being. And in that choice, in choosing that, even when it's difficult, and we tend to think, oh, I need to be an animal here to survive. If you choose the differently, then you're able to grow and to be free. And so I like that particular quote I love, because it encapsulates a lot of a lot of the work that I do, but also a lot of my belief.
Yeah, it's aligned to you, and that's why I like asking with quotes. And I think sometimes, I always, a lot of the leaders we work with, I always say, have your favorite quotes, bring them up when you kick off a team catch up, and go talk about that, shake it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I have got just our basic little, all on our Limitless Leaders podcast, we always ask you these little last questions.
Okay, that sounds exciting. That's like
20-second trivia, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What is your favorite word?
What is my favorite word? Probably, I've used it a few times, interconnectedness.
Why?
Because I think it's inherently, it's inherent in everything that we are. We just don't see it, right? Like we tend to live from within a dualistic experience, because we have a sense of I, which seems to be separate from everything else, right? And so we continuously interact with our, with other people, even with ourselves sometimes, but certainly with other people in our environment, as if it's me versus the world, right? But if you actually look at any level, the psychological level, the physics of it, everything is kind of interconnected, and it's on a vibrational level very much a part of who you are. If you look around, you look around the room that you're sitting in, and you start to think of the number of people who were in some way involved in creating your present moment experience, the chair that you're sitting on, the walls around you, the computers that was built, the people who are the people who work at the electricity commission, who provides the electric for you so you can do that conversation. There's millions of people who have come together in some way to facilitate your present moment experience. They're connected to your present moment experience, and it wouldn't happen if they didn't do their job, right? or space, like the, you know, we tend to think that we're very solid because we operate in that sort
We're
of,
not.
you know, we're not, right? Like
Right.
apparently, this is fascinating. Apparently, if you take all the actual matter, right, in all the whole planet, right, and you somehow sucked out of it, you know, the space between the atoms and all that, and you just ended up with pure matter. There's about that much matter in the whole of, you know, in the whole of
Yeah.
all the rest of it is this, you know, vibrations and tensions and powers, forces that are holding things together, but there's not a lot there, right?
Yeah.
So that space, it, you know, we connected through.
I love
Psychologically, we already discussed we connected. So interconnected, I think connectedness is this
the
is this
beautiful word.
the
Mine's
ground
connection.
level.
Mine's connection, and yours is so very similar.
Yeah,
So,
very similar. Yeah.
but I love that. And I love that what you said, you know, that's a really good way to go into gratitude. If you're feeling like you can't find anything to be grateful for, think about how everything has come to be that's surrounding you. Like, wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. I love
Yeah.
that. What is your favorite sound?
What's my favorite sound? I'd say probably hearing my children laugh.
Yeah, gorgeous.
It's a
Yeah.
there's almost, I can't think of something that's more joyful as a person for myself, right? But laughter in general, I think is
Contagious. I love laughter.
Oh, it's
Especially
amazing.
when you get into a belly laugh. I did the other week with a friend and we just stopped laughing. But the only thing I have, I don't know if it's actually a condition, but once I get laughing, I'm gone for about 4 hours.
Yeah.
I just can't bring it back. I love that.
Yeah.
As you know, I'm a passionate cook. So this is a question. If you had one last meal, what would it be?
Oh, one last meal. That's an interesting one. Why is it hard to choose? It's hard to choose because if it's the one last time I'll eat that particular thing out of everything.
You're probably thinking you're probably not hungry.
Yeah, I've just said lunch before we started. Probably a good cup of coffee.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I call it a hug in a mug.
You know, like it doesn't matter if I'm hungry or not, so I might as well have something that's got that quality, you know, that sort of
Yeah, I love that. And my last question, what profession other than your own would you attempt?
Oh, teacher. Like if I knew at a younger age what I know now about myself, about what, you know, what makes me alive, what brings me joy, the idea of working with you know, young minds and young hearts, and just providing them the background to find themselves without actually interfering and projecting and, you know, sort of trying to mold them, just holding space for those, because that intelligence, again, that intelligence is natural. It comes from, you want to call it the divine, you want to call it consciousness or whatever, until we screw it up. It is very wholesome and very pure. And so just being able to sort of be a background to that, hold a space for that, provide the you know, the learning pathways for that to sort of grow and expand, the most holy job that I think one can do. Yeah,
it's amazing. But you're doing that like me with adults, right? But I know what you're saying. If we could share the things we know now with our younger selves, such as kids, they're willing and they're open and they're at that level to absorb it. It's quite profound. So,
absolutely. And sorry if I may say it, because it's an important point. You know, we are at the point in our collective evolution that has never been there before, because for the first time in our history, the impact of what we do from one generation to the next are really going to determine, you know, like what quality of life, what is the future of life for us as a species. I'm not worried about the planet, but for us as a species, right? And so it's a really interesting point, because all of us who are slightly more conscious of that interconnectedness, and especially in the older generation, we are called to be in service of that next generation, because they're going to have to deal with the shitstorm that we're bequeathing them. And so how do I do that? How do I nurture and encourage leadership that is wise in that next generation is probably the most important kind of element that we can look for. Yeah.
Definitely. So, Michael, thank you. This has been, I can't believe we've gone for nearly an hour. It has flown, which is, I always say, when you're in flow,
we had fun.
Fly. When you're in flow, things fly, which is awesome. So how do people find you? If our
it's pretty easy. Positive neuroplasticity is the model that I work with. It's a slightly cumbersome expression, but the word positive, the word neuroplasticity. So my Instagram tag is positive in neuroplasticity. You can find me on LinkedIn under mindfulness coaching. That's the handle for my LinkedIn profile. And you can check my website, which is happyhabits.com.au.
Yeah, perfect.
You can reach out, and please do reach out. I feel, like the best gift in life is connecting with other people. We talked about that, right?
Yeah,
and so if you have a question, if you want to ask something, if you want to connect, reach out. I'd love that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we'll have Michael's reach out details, his resources under this post, whether you're watching it or listening to it. So thanks again, Michael, for being on the Limitless Leaders podcast. Thank you for everyone that's been out there listening. Just really quickly before I end this, and air quotes, you won't be able to see this if you're listening, we've just released a team communication game about appreciating diversity of thoughts and ideas called 2 Sides in 2 Minutes. My colleague Shelley Flett and I have birthed this game together. So it's 4 teams. It's a fun game. It's a way that you can, share your thoughts on an idea 2 and 4 and get feedback on that. So it's about feedback, it's about communication, and it's about really creating, you'd like this, Michael, that flexibility of thought in really seeing both sides to something. So number 2 sides in 2 minutes.com.au is the website, and we have a collaborative communication program that sits around the game, and a new white paper out as well. So as always, thank you for listening. If you've got any guests you'd like us to have on the show, maybe you, or any topics, let us know. Otherwise, enjoy your day or night from wherever you're chiming in.
You've been listening to Limitless Leaders Podcast, leading from the inside out to develop limitless self-leadership, leaders, teams, and organizations. To find out how you can accelerate your mindset, your communication, collaboration, and connection to become a limitless leader, sign up for our Limitless Leaders Podcast series at www.reneegiarrusso.com/podcast series. That's reneegiarrusso.com/podcast series.